You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org. Hi, listeners. I wanted to take a moment to talk about Heritage Radio Network, the organization that produces this podcast. HRN is the only podcast network dedicated to food, beverages, and the culinary world. It's also a nonprofit that educates emerging food storytellers. HRN brings listeners free podcasts on everything from the artistry of baking to the craft of brewing, the complexities of cheesemongering to the challenges of solving climate change. And they need your help. Help HRN thrive by going to heritageradionetwork.org/donate and making a donation to keep food radio free and accessible. This is Capri Cafaro, host of Eat Your Heartland Out, back with another episode about Canadian food culture in our limited series, More Than Maple. Today's episode brings us out to Manitoba, where I meet historians and authors Janis and Kimberly Moore to learn about Manitoba food culture and stories behind Canadian snack food. You may be surprised by what you learn in this episode. Spoiler alert, there are some Midwestern connections you may not see coming. Janis and Kim, I am honored to have you both on the program, both at the same time. You are incredible experts, a wealth of knowledge. I didn't know where else to turn when I wanted to learn about Manitoba food. So thank you both for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, it's regional foodways in North America are very they're unique, to each individual province or state, or even, within those provinces or states. And certainly Manitoba is no different. And oftentimes we look at trying to define a national food. A lot of things get overlooked, no matter what country you're thinking about. We tend to focus on one or two things that become the sort of marquee, and when I think about Canadian food, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this limited series is, it's more than maple. People, it's maple, it's poutine, maybe it's butter tarts, maybe it's bannock, but there's a lot more there. And you really have to do, in order to do it, justice, you kind of got to get into the different regions of the different provinces. So enter both of you. And I want to ask you both, maybe Kim, I'll start with you, but you both have done a ton of work as academics, oral historians and writers, about what is Manitoba food, asking that question. So how would you define it, Kim?
I think I wouldn't define it. So it depends who you ask and in what context.
I'll ask this then. Janis, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, the conclusion our book reaches is that it's not the right question to ask, in part because of what it leaves out. Mm-hmm. And quite often what it leaves out is the pre-Manitoba history, right? First, who even is a Manitoban, who gets to count, right? What do you do with the folks who've been here since time immemorial and saw glacial ages pass? And what do you do with the folks who are recent arrivals and may not fully identify as Manitobans? And they're all part of the story of the province as it exists now. So we thought it's a question that while we raise it in the book, we prefer answering other questions instead.
Sure. And what other questions do you decide to explore in the book and in the work that you've done in the Manitoba Food Project?
Well, their driving questions for the Manitoba Food History Project is there's three of them. It's how has food been produced and sold and consumed in what's now Manitoba, and how have those three processes changed over time? Mm-hmm. And that way we can look at the tension between folks who are using food as a way of maintaining or preserving identity, and the folks who are using food to try and regulate those who they are choosing to identify as other, or as not not the right kind of Manitobans, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting dynamic that you've described. Give us an example of that tension, right, between who are the groups that are regulating the food and defining other groups as others. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think that has changed over time. I'm not sure how to specifically answer this in the course of diners really concisely, but I think it's more of a process of change over time and how this is latent in that evolution. So, one of the ways that this is regulated is in sort of city and provincial legislations in who
Mhm.
gets to sell food by what means, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, with many immigrants at the turn of the century, these are European immigrants, it was very common to have street sellers selling ready made food to the folks who might need a quick lunch during their workday. And as this practice becomes more and more common, it becomes more and more regulated. And so it becomes regulated out of under the umbrella of health concerns, but also this is an unfamiliar way of sort of, vending. And it's perceived as less than, as maybe not hygienic or not appropriate in the context of our modernizing city, where there are new places like cafes and lunch counters that fit more easily in this legislation. So, a really great example of that, too, is a man who wanted to establish a night lunch wagon, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a large wagon with windows on both sides that food can be sold out of. And the city of Winnipeg didn't really know what to do with that at the time. It was in the 1930s, and they were like, well, we have no.
The first food truck of Winnipeg sounds like almost
It would have been had it happened. The
right.
city of Winnipeg basically said, we don't know what to do with your request. We don't think we have the authority to approve this, and it would be very disruptive to practice. And even where these were existing in the US, they eventually fell out of favor as, something that catered to the night crowd, which was perceived as an unsavory bunch. And again, unhygienic and risky in terms of their lack of corresponding to a particular standard.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think that the question I think I would have as a follow up to that is, whom who are the people that would be operating something like this? Immigrants, workers, indigenous people. Who are the people that in this case are being regulated?
So, especially in the age where diners and drive ins become really popular, in Winnipeg, Greek immigrants made an outsized contribution to that area. So many of our longest lasting diners and drive ins are Greek owned restaurants. And so basically, there were waves of immigration of Greek immigrants, and they were able to use the skills that they came to this country with to establish these businesses. They have this really beautiful multi-generation support of each other. So this kind of non-competitive spirit of running their businesses, where the new immigrants would start to work at the established restaurants, have all of their training, and then go on to establish their own restaurants. And what comes out of this is a really unique thing in Winnipeg, which is a burger called the Fat Boy.
Oh, I'm so glad you are going to bring up. Thank you for bringing up the Fat Boy because, and maybe Janis, I will kick this to you because I feel like you and I have talked about the Fat Boy in the past, because it is something that is unique and has a bit of a potential link to something that is in my neck of the woods in Ohio, which is Skyline Chili. So tell me about this Fat Boy.
For
What is it
sure.
like? What makes it unique? And let's connect the dots.
I'm going to describe it to you, and I'm going to describe the best place to get it in Winnipeg, and then I'm going to throw it back to Kim because she is really the Fat Boy expert.
Okay.
But the Fat Boy is a burger. It has to have shredded lettuce, it has to have cheese, tomato slice, meat, obviously. But the key is the Greek chili. So it's runny, not too runny. It doesn't have beans. It's cinnamon inflected.
Yep.
And the best place, in my opinion, in Winnipeg to get it is at VJ's, which is one of the original Junior's restaurants in Winnipeg. It's been there for a long time, right across from the train station. But the connections to the United States, Kim has done a lot of research to uncover that.
Well, I am just a humble, observer of this, because what you've just described, Janis, particularly when it comes to that Greek chili, is exactly how I would describe Skyline chili, which is known as Cincinnati chili. Skyline is kind of the chain that made it popular. And it's my understanding from speaking to folks that there is a Greek connection to the Skyline chili as well. So it comes all full circle, at least a little bit. So Kim, let's do a little bit of a deeper dive.
Yeah, and you'll have to forgive me. I'm drawing a blank on what this chili is actually called in Greece. So the chili, as we call it, makes a migratory journey as well. So as waves of Greek immigrants come to North America, the entry point, of course, is in the east, and there's an eastward migration, or a westward migration. Pardon me. And so, what happens in the eastern regions of the U.S., this becomes known as red hots, right? There's this meat sauce that goes on top of red hots, which is a type of hot dog. And so I assume as it's made its way to Cincinnati, this is another localization of this same food. And the same thing happened in Canada. The earliest restaurants where they would have been making this were, kind of Ontario. There's still diners in Thunder Bay that serve it. And then when it gets to Winnipeg, certain players conspire to make it part of this Fat Boy burger.
Yeah, it seems like it's made a journey as a topping, and because it's the Skyline chili is also on spaghetti essentially. So a fascinating journey, and I think one of the interesting things about food and culture is that it is this singular way to be able to reflect back. A sense of place, a sense of time, immigration, migration patterns, and all of those things. And I'm a broken record on the show because I say it all like every single episode, but it just continues to be reinforced with every person I talk to. So you all are both of you are academics there at the University of Winnipeg, and you joined forces to explore these important food culture questions, I believe right back in 2018, and embarked on this, Manitoba Food History Project. Janis, why don't you tell me a little bit more about how this got off the ground and then how it kind of unfolded?
For sure. I had just finished writing my book, Snacks, A Canadian Food History.
Oh, put a pin in snacks. We're not going to let you go without talking about snacks. So we're going to mark in that, but yes, snacks, go on.
Right. And in the course of doing that research, which I thought was the typical labor history, oral history, Canadian history, business history that I've been doing for many years, I discovered that I'd stumbled into doing food history. I hadn't realized it was a thing, and enjoyed it so much that I wanted to do more of it. And then there are a couple of colleagues here on campus, Kimberly Moore, one of them here on this interview, and Kent Davies, also from the Oral History Center here at University of Winnipeg. And we enjoyed each other's company, respected each other's expertise, and decided to work together on a food-related project. And so expanded it to look at all sorts of food within the context of Manitoba. And just kind of started fantasizing about if we could get a grant, what would we want it to do and be. And so Kent was very clear he wanted to do a podcast. I did not know what that was, but I was happy to go along.
Yeah.
And so we created Preserves podcast. And from there, we also, decided to do some RGS story maps. Kimberly has some expertise in digital and public history. And so we also fantasized about, someone jokingly suggested getting a food truck. And we thought, that's a good idea. We'll get a food truck and we'll do oral history interviews on the truck while people cook, and see what happens from there. And no one was more surprised than us that we actually got the grant to do all those things. But that's what was behind what eventually became Manitoba, and eventually became our Preserves podcast and our website, manitobafoodhistory.ca.
I mean, with one spark of an idea and the luck of a grant, I'm sure, and a ton of hard work, you've managed to amass a ton of valuable information. Kim, as an oral historian, did you spend time then in the food truck, collecting these stories as people were cooking there?
I did, and I'll do you one better. I also drove the food truck.
Love it.
Which I'm happy to never have to do again. But the interviewing part was fun and challenging in a lot of ways. So typically with oral history interviews, we're pretty obsessed about getting good quality recordings. We go to a quiet studio and we sort of elevate the human voice and make sure there's no other noises going on. And in the food truck, we had a whole new methodology that came with a whole new set of concerns. So,
do tell.
Yeah. So one of the preferred methods of doing oral history is to do a life story interview. And that typically takes a long time because we just give people full control over how they want to tell their life story. So because we were going to do interviews on a food truck, and we decided that people could tell us about a food that was meaningful to them, that gave it a little bit more focus and changed the nature of the storytelling. So, which was great in a lot of ways. Instead of this, potentially uncomfortable interview where you're sitting across from the table from one another, it was a very participatory way of doing an interview. We felt it was a lot more comfortable. You could just kind of get into the act of cooking. Us as interviewers could ask people questions about what they were doing and why this food, meant something to them. And as a bonus, we got to carry on that conversation while eating the food outside of the truck. So,
well, it's very participatory all the way around.
And really novel. Like, I'm not aware of another oral history project that has, gone about things this way. And just a note on the challenges that comes with, we were very lucky that Kent Davies is a technician. He has a background in audio. So our truck had a generator. There's all sorts of cooking sounds and, sounds happening outside of the truck. So that was an incredible hurdle that he had to work to mitigate so that we could actually hear all of those great conversations.
Now, I know that being able to catalog and archive those kind of conversations, not just in your book, Manitoba, or on the website, but is there, as an oral historian, a methodology for preserving these stories for other researchers, academic students to be able to call upon in the future for future research?
Absolutely. And I'm actually in the process of doing that right now. So what we did with this food history project was took a very labor-intensive methodology, which is oral history, turned it into a media-based public history project, which added like a whole other realm of work to do as well. So now my job is to make sure that's all organized well, which we did do a very good job of through the project. But typically what's what the end result of this will be is that we will have a searchable catalog of interviews where we have direct permission from interviewees to do so. All of the interviews will be searchable and discoverable in the catalog. You can click on a link and you can listen to the interview and read a transcript. They'll all be indexed, so you have a really efficient way of navigating them. And then they'll be preserved in our archive. So folks doing food history research in the future, or even relatives, family members of people who we interviewed, they'll be able to find these interviews too and use them for their own work.
Oh, wow. That is absolutely, I mean, that sounds incredibly laborious. I hope that you have help from, grad students and others that are willing to pitch in and be part of this process. So, tell me again, either of you, just, there's so much that I'm sure that you took away from this, but what stands out? I mean, we've touched upon it's difficult to define what is Manitoba food, and you've flagged something like Winnipeg's Fat Boys, but are there other things that stand out? One thing that comes to mind for me, at least, and again, I am a humble observer in all of this, but is the flapper pie. It's something that I'm familiar with because I have a weird pie obsession. My understanding is that it is something that flapper pie does connect back to Manitoba. And so wondering if one of you or either of you might be able to give me some further insight on flapper pie.
I'll start us off, and then Janis, if there's anything you want to contribute to this, please feel free. So in our book, we have a flapper pie recipe that was published in the Winnipeg Free Press. And we have that recipe in there because we also have a made in Manitoba restaurant called the Salisbury House that sells this flapper pie, kind of always has, always will sort of thing. It's on the menu. And it's on the menu ostensibly because this is a pie associated with the prairies. So what I've come to discover is this is not the only recipe for flapper pie. Like all recipes, there's 100 different variants of it, and the way you make this depends on who you ask. But I've found other sources in which the exclusive difference between flapper pie and a cream pie is the order in which you kind of assemble the ingredients and the temperature that you bring the milk to. So this results in maybe a different consistency of the pie. And then the flapper pie has graham crumbs sprinkled on top. So that is the distinguishing characteristic between a flapper pie and a regular cream pie, as far as I know.
I mean, that's a good explanation, and I've heard the graham cracker aspect is definitely a distinguishing characteristic.
For sure, you cannot do this with pastry.
This is Eat Your Heartland Out with me, Capri Cafaro. After the break, I'll be back with more from our guests, Janis and Kimberly.
This episode is brought to you by Plugra European-style butter, crafted for those who demand precision and exceptional results in the kitchen. With 82% butter fat and a slow churn process, Plugra gives you flakier crusts, fluffier cakes, and rich, melt-in-your-mouth pastries. Because great baking starts with great butter. Unlike standard American butters, which have only 80% butter fat, Plugra ensures the ideal moisture and fat balance so your recipes turn out just right every time. That's why professional chefs trust Plugra and home bakers love it. Plugra's slow churn process creates a smooth, creamy butter that gives dough a soft, pliable texture, making rolling, folding, and laminating effortless. Whether you're perfecting a buttery pie crust or layering a delicate croissant, Plugra helps you bake with confidence. Experience the difference for yourself. Find Plugra in stores near you or visit plugra.com. That's Plugra.com.
Welcome back to Eat Your Heartland Out. I'm your host, Capri Cafaro. and I'm continuing our deep dive into Manitoba food culture with historians and authors Janis and Kimberly Moore.
So I want to switch gears for a minute. We're sticking with Manitoba, but we're gonna go away from the flapper pie for a second. And I noticed there's a chapter called Unlawful Pierogies.
Yes.
And I would love, maybe Janis, you can talk to us a little bit about unlawful pierogies. What's that all about? And culturally, the context, there in Manitoba with an immigrant population there.
For sure. This stems from the Eastern European migrations here. There's a fondness for pierogies or verenice or, whatever term you might want to use for them. It's common on the prairies. I'm sure it's common in anywhere else in North America where there's large concentrations of particularly Ukrainians,
Yep.
but also Polish folks.
We got it in Ohio, and I can vouch for this as a Ukrainian American. This is a thing.
Yeah, and so you can buy them commercially, but that hasn't always been the case. And certainly the quality of commercial pierogies has changed over time. They're much better than they used to be. But, early first half of the 20th century, let's say, you had to have a pierogi lady. And for folks who are really committed to the quality of pierogies, even today, you have to have a pierogi lady.
It's true.
But being a pierogi lady is a job, but it's not legal. So these are people, primarily women, who make pierogies in their home for sale. Because of the dairy-based nature of these pierogies, it's regulated by health agencies, and you're not supposed to be producing these except in commercially inspected kitchens. But everyone makes these at home, particularly if you're from that background. And so to make a few extra dozen and sell them to a neighbor or sell them to others in your community, word of mouth, is fairly common. But there are crackdowns from time to time by the province on folks doing those sales, or in other sales too. Spring rolls, also a thing now popular among folks. But every migrant community, it seems to have their own distinctive food that they really love and that there isn't an appropriate commercial version of. And so they buy these things illegally.
Yeah. So what happens then? What's the penalty for illegal pierogies?
Oh, it changes over time. Usually it's simply a conversation. They come to you, and this was actually hit the news in Manitoba during COVID, the early year or two, because there were a lot of folks who were, their job had let them go perhaps, or they found themselves stuck at home with and wanting something to do. And so there was a lot of folks making pierogies and other foods in their home kitchens and then advertising them for sale on Facebook and other social media applications. And so provincial inspectors were contacting these folks and letting them know that you need to stop selling this, or at a minimum stop advertising it publicly, right? And so I don't know that there were fines issued, although that's certainly an option. But yeah, it's not a legal thing to do, but it's a very common thing to do.
That's interesting. Now, I want to go from the immigrant community to the Indigenous community, and you also have a chapter in the book on Manoomin, wild rice, and it's something that I had an opportunity to experience harvesting in northern Minnesota. So with individuals, or Ojibwe individuals who harvested in a traditional manner. So I would love to know what this looks like and what the tradition is for Manoomin in Manitoba.
I'm sure it's very similar. I mean, the title of that chapter is in her book is Manoomin, and that's not only out of respect for the original name of the folks who have been planting and cultivating and harvesting and processing it for generations, but it's also because the English term for that product erases that history. Mm-hmm. So it's the wild rice. It's not wild, and it's not rice.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing about this that resembles anything you can buy in a store called wild rice.
Exactly, and the preference to call it wild is part of that history, right? In determining that this is something, or choosing to call something wild, we
Yeah.
imply that there is no prior history to it. That is simply a product found out and about. No one has done anything to develop it. No one has done anything to cultivate it. It's just up for grabs, right? And the history of Monoman is that, no, this is a product that has been deliberately introduced by Anishinaabe and other groups into specific lakes where it was not growing naturally. There's a whole plethora of practices in terms of attracting certain wildlife in order to prevent other wildlife that are predators on that Monoman from eating it before you have a chance to harvest it. Harvesting it is its own separate skill, and then the processing of it so that it then becomes a product that you can actually cook and eat. It's not that you just
Right.
chop it out of the lake and then it's ready to go, right? So all of those are incredibly detailed and skilled practices that are wiped from knowledge when we prefer to call this stuff wild rice and then assume that it's okay for various groups to pass laws against who owns it and who gets to sell it commercially, right?
Right. Absolutely. And so, I mean, again, food telling a powerful story, and another good example about who's regulating, who's getting to tell the story, how is it interpreted, and what are the layers, beneath, what is being presented to the public, because who the storyteller is informs what the story is, right?
Yes.
Oftentimes. And it seems like that is a recurring theme in the work that you and Kim have done. Kim, I'm going to ask you this question. You got a favorite Canadian snack food?
Oh, it's so hard to pick, but it has to be Hawkins cheesies.
Cheese. They are
It,
famous.
it has to be them.
So
both because, it's such a treat. You can't eat this every day. Well, probably Janis can, but I can, it's something really special. There's no generic or alternative brand of Hawkins cheesy. It is its own unique thing.
And it is very special to Canada. And you said Janis might be able to eat them all the time. Janis, you are the snacks expert. We've been talking about Manitoba specifically, but let's zoom out a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about your work researching snacks. We talked about it earlier in our conversation. I said, let's put a pin in it. We're back to it. So how does one decide, you know what, I am going to dedicate a bunch of research to, doing a deep dive into Canadian snack food? I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yes, and it is. I mean, a lot of my research either comes from personal issues I'm trying to work out, or it comes from people making joking suggestions to me that I then take seriously. So
either way, it works.
Yeah. So I have a potato chip problem.
Knowing is half the battle.
Yeah, exactly. I love them, probably a little too much. And I was casting about for, my next research project at that point in time. And my brother said, well, why don't you research, I'm telling him that I'm trying to find another business labor story in history to uncover. And he's like, well, why don't you like chips? Why don't you study the history of old Dutch potato chips? I'm like, oh, okay. And meet another colleague and I'm talking about it with him and he goes, oh, it's way too narrow. You should make it the entire history of snacks in Canada. And I thought, oh, sure. Okay, why not? And thus, Snacks, a Canadian Food History was born. But yeah, I got to agree with Kim. Hawkins Cheesies, not a Manitoba company. It's only in one small town in Ontario. But it has an outsized presence in particularly Western Canadian desires and values and tables, right? Like it's a really popular product.
How does that happen? So if it's something that is from a small town in Ontario, what is that journey that gets from there to becoming an obsession of Western Canadians?
It's a hilarious history, in my opinion. It's actually a Midwest American history. So it didn't start in Canada. It's the remnant, the sad, tiny remnant of a once giant snack manufacturer in Chicago.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So W.T. Hawkins was one of the largest snack manufacturers in Chicago. At one point in time, so large that Lay's potato chips, which you might have heard of, were considering selling themselves to Hawkins.
Wow.
Yeah. And through a combination of Second World War, some bad business decisions, possible mob connections, and just like really bad divorces that ate up a lot of corporate value. The company ended up being just the one branch plant that still exists in a small town in Ontario. It was a Midwest farmer, Midwest United States farmer, who developed a process for extruding cornmeal as a way of storing fodder for his cattle in winter. And W.T. Hawkins heard about this, and I said, like, I bet if we deep fry it and cover it in cheese, we'd have a thing. And he was right.
I mean, if you deep fry anything covered in cheese, right? I mean, it's going to be a success.
Preach. Yeah.
It is going to be a success. Now let's talk Old Dutch, because, it also, my understanding, also has a Midwestern American connection.
Yes, Old Dutch potato chips. A lot of Winnipeggers think of it as a Winnipeg brand because there is a plant here that manufactures it. And in fact, there are Old Dutch potato chip plants across now the entirety of Canada. But it originates in Minneapolis with a family there. In fact, the first creator of the Old Dutch brand, not a Dutch guy, he just thought it sounded like a neat name. And he was making them out of his home in Minneapolis. And for folks from, not from the region, it's less than a day's drive. It's like an 8-hour-ish drive, I think, from Winnipeg to Minneapolis. Kim, is that right?
I wouldn't know. I've never driven it.
Okay. Well, Kim's the exception. There's a lot of Winnipeggers who will, on a long weekend, go to Minneapolis. And so there were a couple of fellows who would go down there, learn to love Old Dutch potato chips, and started bringing them back to Winnipeg to sell. And they were just doing so well with it that they managed to convince Old Dutch that you really should just build a plant here because people love this stuff. And so that's how Old Dutch potato chips came to Canada.
And now I feel like it's this synonymous Canadian brand, right? And so these two things that have an origin story in the American Midwest have become hallmarks of the Canadian snack landscape. And it makes some sense. Again, I think there's a lot of similarities and shared culture in a lot of ways around the Great Lakes between the American Midwest, Great Lakes, places, and the Prairie states as well, places like the Dakotas and parts of Canada. And I think you could say that across the board, but I'm assuming that some of these things aren't, they're more sort of niche and regional, like so many snacks are. I mean, I think about in my own backyard, things like Clark bars, which you probably have never heard of, because they're basically like Butterfingers, but you can only really get them in Western Pennsylvania. Like Mallow cups, which you may have seen or not seen, but they're basically like, peanut butter cups, except they're filled with coconut, like Kodak cream, marshmallowy stuff. Again, very regional, I'm always on the hunt for these things where I can find them. And so I would think that the same kind of concept would happen in Canada. We're talking about Western Canada, but what about, someplace like the Maritimes or Quebec? Like, are there, standout snacks that are just like, wow, you can only find that in PEI? I don't know.
For sure. Maritimes, I would name two in particular, and one would be barley sugar toys, and the other would be chicken bones.
Neither of those sound particularly appetizing to me. I will
Right?
just put that out there, but again, I never tasted either. And tell me more.
Barley sugar toys they're just a hard sugar candy, but they come in unique shapes that literally look like toys. So very elaborate molds for the hard candy that you pour it into. So it'll look like a rocking horse, and you can actually, rock it on a table, just so a little miniature rocking horse or something like that, or a miniature locomotive. They're really kind of awkward to eat because they're all bumpy, and like it's a guaranteed carve your mouth open if you try and suck on these things.
One of those like rock candy on a stick things almost.
Exactly. Yeah. In terms of the damage it does to you. Yeah. Yeah. And chicken bones, these are small, hard candies, bright pink in color, at the center of which is some chocolate.
Well, good, not a chicken bone. So
no,
we're going in the right direction then. And what is the etymology of that? Like, why are they called chicken bones?
I think maybe because they look, if you have never seen a chicken bone, you might imagine it might look like that, in that they're a little rectangular with edges to them and that pale pink color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't really know. And they have a, marrow at the center, only it's chocolate instead of bone marrow.
Yeah, that's. Did that come from any specific place? Was there a good story behind its creation?
No, I don't know that anyone claims to have been the inventor, or else everyone thinks that they've been the inventor, which is the case of so many candies, right?
Yeah.
But Ganong in New Brunswick claims to be the inventor of the candy bar.
Interesting. So what's their claim?
Their claim is that they're the first ones to put chocolate as a flat, food within a wrapping paper that you can carry. That other people might have been selling it in bar form, but it was, in the very early 20th century, you would buy it, and carry it around yourself. It wasn't pre-wrapped.
Yeah, there are similar origin stories for the ice cream bar.
Right.
As a matter of fact. So good humor, and that whole conversation around that has a kind of a similar, like maybe, portable ice cream was out there in some way, but to have it like on a stick and et cetera, is like the new thing.
Yes.
For good humor. So that is interesting.
Well, and Hawkins Cheesies, just to go back to them, at one point in time, they were also making potato chips, and they claim they are the first in Canada to add flavor to potato chips.
Really? And so that's interesting.
Yeah, they experimented with a couple of flavors, some of which didn't stick. One of them was coconut, but...
Ugh. Okay.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, I don't... Now, did you do a lot of taste testing in all of this?
Absolutely. It's the only reason I do food history.
So, Kim, do you get to I know you were not part of the snacks, project, but did you get a chance to do any taste testing on the side and help out, or in general, even if it wasn't for this project, it sounds like one of the benefits of doing food history is getting to eat.
Oh, yeah, problematically so. You have to budget to replace your wardrobe every few years because it doesn't fit anymore. But yeah, of course, you have to do the research, right? You have to know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to describe it and see it. It's a whole other thing to be able to, understand what someone is talking about, with those flavors and smells too. I mean, that's the thing about about food as well, is that, it's multidimensional in that sense.
Absolutely. I do, with my food history students, one of the cooking in the classroom activities that we do is a medieval recipe for stuffed eggs, which is basically like a deviled egg, but without the liquid that you add to the yolk. So it's very dry. And then you add just like half a dozen spices that, from our 21st century North American standpoint, don't go together, and you add them in massive quantity, because the purpose of these stuffed eggs is to show off your wealth. And how better to show off your wealth in medieval Europe than by, demonstrating that you're able to buy all these incredibly expensive spices.
Absolutely. I mean,
It's one thing to read about that, but until you actually make it and taste it, like it sticks in your memory in a different way.
Well, and what are students' reactions to something like that?
They're really interested because their initial instinct, especially since amounts are not given in this recipe, is to just,
and that's oftentimes the case with any historical recipe.
They try and modernize it and add very little, and you explain to them that's not the purpose here, right? And then they're startled by the taste.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's something they'll never forget.
For sure.
Well, I want to ask you. We're getting close to wrapping up our time together, but you've done incredible work up to this point. Any new books on the horizon? New areas of research that we should know about? You can break with us here first.
Well, we have another grant application out, and so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, the intention from the day one with this project was that it would be something that would continue, that it's not grant dependent. The Manitoba Food History Project website will continue to have material added to it, whether it's the Preserves podcast or RHAS story maps or whatever. But yeah, the research on Manitoba food history will continue one way or another.
Yeah, I appreciate your collective commitment to making it happen. Kim, anything else that you want to add, that you want us to know about your work in oral history?
Yeah, I guess I am, grant or no grant, I will be turning my attention to the archives. Like I said, I'm working on getting the interviews from the Manitoba Food History Project to be discoverable and accessible for people. And in that process, I'll inevitably listen to these things again. I am always going through archives, trying to find oral histories. Mm-hmm. And I know there are so many stories that have been recorded that maybe aren't so easily discoverable or accessible. So mm-hmm. for sure, anything I find along the way will serve as inspiration.
Well, I will definitely be keeping my eyes and ears open. And, you all are providing a great service for people that are just curious, or academics or journalists. I mean, so the list goes on and on. So, Janis, Kim, thank you so very much for sharing all of your knowledge. Again, Janis, I think you mentioned the Manitoba Food History Project website, but remind our listeners one more time where they can find it.
ManitobaFoodHistory.ca.
Fantastic. Well, I will definitely be putting that into my search bar, and hope everyone else does as well. Thanks to both of you for sharing your incredible wealth of knowledge. I feel like we could talk and eat for forever. So thanks again for taking some time.
Thank you.
Thanks again for having us.
You've been listening to Eat Your Heartland Out. This episode was produced by me, Capri Cafaro. Our audio engineers are Liam Warner and Armin Spengen. Theme music by Jason Shaw. You can learn more about the show by visiting heritageradionetwork.org/Eat Your Heartland Out. Eat Your Heartland Out is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.